Caribbean culture is a term that explains the artistic, musical, literary, culinary, political and social elements that are representative of the Caribbean people all over the world. The Caribbean's culture has historically been influenced by that of African, European, and Amerindian and Asian traditions. It has also been strongly influenced by that of its linguistic, economic, and cultural neighbor, the United States. Being a collection of settler nations, the Caribbean has been shaped by waves of migration that have combined to form a unique blend of customs, cuisine, and traditions that have marked the socio-cultural development of the nation. Development of Caribbean culture. Caribbean culture is a product of its history and geography. Most of the Caribbean territories were inhabited and developed earlier than European colonies in the Americas, with the result that themes and symbols of pioneers, farmers, and traders were important in the early development of Caribbean culture. The British conquest of the Caribbean in 1759 brought a large francophone population under British rule, creating a need for compromise and accommodation, while the migration of United Empire loyalists from the 13 colonies brought in strong British, Spanish, French, African and even Dutch influences. Although not without conflict, the Caribbean's early interactions with First Nations and indigenous populations were relatively short-lived, compared to the experience of native peoples in the United States, combined with relatively late economic development in many regions. This difficult history has disallowed Caribbean native peoples having any strong influence on the national culture, even destroying the remaining identity. Bilingualism and multiculturalism. French Caribbean, Spanish Caribbean, Creole language and patois' early development was relatively cohesive during the 17th and 18th centuries, which allowed Francophone culture to survive and thrive within the Caribbean. Multicultural heritage is enshrined in many islands. In parts of the Caribbean, multiculturalism itself is the cultural norm and diversity is the force that unites the community. Although officially a quarter of the Caribbean population is English-speaking, the largest group is attributed to Spanish speakers. Some 22% speak French while only 1% speak Dutch. However, though the Caribbean today is linked with 59 living languages, these are not spoken in the insular Caribbean, but on what is referred to as the continental Caribbean. In the French islands, cultural identity is strong, and many French-speaking islanders commentators speak of a French culture as distinguished from English Caribbean culture, but some also see Caribbean as a collection of several regional and ethnic subcultures. While French Caribbean culture is the most obvious example, Spanish influences have allowed survival of non-English dialects. However, the influence of Ulster immigrants to Barbados has had the effect of minimizing Irish influences in the Caribbean's culture, and highlighting British influences instead. Until the 1980s, the Caribbean's Pacific trade has also brought a large Chinese influence into Trinidad and other areas. Caribbean identity. Primary influences on Caribbean identity trace back to the arrival, beginning in the early 17th century, of French settlers, English settlers and the Spanish settlers. First Nations played a critical part in the development of European colonies in Caribbean, from the role in assisting exploration of the continent, the sugar trade and inter-European power struggles to the creation of the Afro-Caribbean people. Through their art and culture, First Nations and African descendants continue to exert influence on the Caribbean identity. With the gradual loosening of political and cultural ties to the United Kingdom in the 20th century, immigrants from European, African, Caribbean and Asian nationalities have shaped Caribbean identity, a process that continues today with the arrival of significant numbers of immigrants from non-British or French backgrounds, adding the theme of multiculturalism to the debate. Today, The Caribbean has a diverse makeup of nationalities and cultures and constitutional protection for policies that promote multiculturalism rather than a single national myth. The issue of Caribbean identity remains under scrutiny. In true Caribbean fashion, however, even the search for an identity has itself become an object for self-criticism, usually because many Caribbean people confuse reasons for ridding themselves of colonial shackles and compounding the loss of their own Caribbean identity by clinging to an African non-identity in its stead. Cultural protectionism in Caribbean. Cultural protectionism in the Caribbean has, since the mid-20th century, taken the form of conscious, interventionist attempts on the part of various Caribbean governments to promote Caribbean cultural production and limit the effect of foreign, largely American, culture on the domestic audience. Sharing a large border and a common language with the United States, the Caribbean faces a difficult position in regard to American culture, be it direct attempts at the Caribbean market or the general diffusion of American culture in the globalized media arena. While the Caribbean people tried to maintain their cultural differences, they must also balance this with responsibility in trade arrangements such as the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade and the North American Free Trade Agreement. Symbols. Official symbols of Caribbean include the parrot, palm, and the shell. Many official symbols of the country, such as the flags of Caribbean, have been changed or modified over the past years in order to Caribbeanize them and emphasize or remove references to the United Kingdom. For example, the Cayman Islands now uses national symbols that include their indigenous asterisk parrot, silver thatch, palm, and the wild banana orchid. Symbols of the monarchy in Caribbean continue to be featured in, for example, the arms of Caribbean and armed forces. The designation Royal remains for institutions as varied as the Royal Caribbean Police, though with the unification of armed forces into the Caribbean Forces, the Royal Caribbean Air Force and Royal Caribbean Navy ceased to exist. However, certain Caribbean Forces Land Force Command units carry royal titles. Caribbean Forces Maritime Command vessels are still styled HMCS. Arts. The works of most early Caribbean painters followed European trends. During the mid-1800s, Caribbean painters have developed a wide range of highly individual styles. The arts have flourished in Caribbean since the 1900s, and especially since the end of World War II in 1945. The Washington Organization of American States houses one of the oldest 20th-century art collections representing the Caribbean. For example, one exhibit showcased works included two important pieces by women artists of the Caribbean, El Vendedor and Rullo, 1938, by modernist Celeste Waswigil of the Dominican Republic, and an oil painting entitled Mar Pacifico, 1943, by Cuban modernist Emilio Pelaez. There have even been a rare selection of prints by Haitian artists such as Castor Basile, Wilson Bigord, Dieudonné Sidor, Jacques Enguerrand Gourgue and Gabriel Lévesque that have not been exhibited since they were part of a traveling exhibition in 1948. Literature. Caribbean literature is often divided into Spanish, French and English language literature, which are rooted in the literary traditions of Spain, France and Britain, respectively. However, collectively this literature has become distinctly Caribbean. Caribbean literature, whether written in English, French or Spanish, often reflects the Caribbean perspective on nature, life, and the region's position in the world. Caribbean identity is closely tied to its literature. Caribbean literature is often categorized by region or island, by the status of the author, and by literary period, such as Caribbean postmoderns or Caribbean poets between the wars. Caribbean authors have won numerous awards. Mark Marquardt won Best First Book Award in the 2006 Commonwealth Writers' Prize for the Caribbean region for his work of fiction Suspended Sentences, Fictions of Atonement, a selection of poetry and fiction produced in the Caribbean during the 19th and 20th centuries and be searched at Caribbean literature. Music. The music of the Caribbean reflects the multicultural influences that have shaped the Caribbean, and these are mainly African. The first historical figures to influence Caribbean musicians were from the South Americas and to some degree Africa. Nevertheless, the Caribbean's first peoples, the Spanish, the French, and the British, have all made large contributions to the musical heritage of Caribbean as well. Since Spanish explorer Columbus arrived and established the first permanent Caribbean settlements, the islands have produced their own composers, musicians and ensembles. For the 17th century onwards, the Caribbean has developed a music infrastructure that includes church halls, performing arts centers, record companies, radio stations and television music video channels. The music has subsequently been heavily influenced by American culture because of its proximity and migration between the two regions. The Caribbean has produced a variety of internationally successful performers and artists. These individuals are honored at the awards recognizing Caribbean achievement in popular music. In addition, the Caribbean is home to a number of popular summertime folk festivals. The Caribbean has also produced many notable composers who have contributed in a variety of ways to the history of Western classical music. There are the Anthony N. Sabga Caribbean Awards for Excellence, launched in October 2005 to awards in the arts. Up to 2010, they were made biennially, but as of 2011, the awards will be made yearly in ceremonies in Trinidad. Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham facilitated the first Caribbean Festival of the Arts in 1972 in Georgetown, Guyana. Caribbean theatre. The Caribbean has a thriving stage theatre scene. Judy Stone writes, in addition to the conventional drama of social realism and the yard theatre, the range includes popular farce and route theatre, musical folk theatre, pantomime, community theatre, Jamaica's gun court theatre, political theatre, church theatre, children's theatre, storytelling, the street theatre of carnival and carnival theatre, calypso theatre, theatre of ritual, and the poetic theatre of St. Lucia's. Derek Walcott. There is also a considerable body of dramatic work written for film, television and radio. Cuba, in particular, has a comparatively vibrant film industry. Theatre festivals draw many tourists in the tourist months. As an example, Ruprecht argues Creole theatre would take one on a tour to a chain of islands in the Caribbean, and he offers an analysis of the contemporary Creole theatre of the Caribbean and of the work of some of the playwrights associated with Creole theatre, such as Frank Etienne and Cave in Haiti, José Excelis and Arthur Leris in Guadeloupe, as well as Bookman and Placolai of Martinique. The Trinidad Theatre Workshop. Film and television. The Caribbean film market was dominated by the American film industry for decades, although that film industry has since inception seen a prominent role for actors, directors, producers and technicians of Caribbean origin. Filmmakers from the Caribbean began to challenge Hollywood by making innovative and relevant documentary, dramas and feature films. Some Caribbean islands have developed a small but vigorous film industry that has produced a variety of well-known films, actors, and auteurs. Also, the distinct French Caribbean and Spanish Caribbean society permits the work of directors to contribute very different film forms. Some have become the Caribbean's first films to win the award for Best Foreign Language Film. Many Caribbean people are employed in the film industry, and celebrities spotting is frequent throughout many Caribbean cities. Caribbean television, especially supported by the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, is the home of a variety of locally produced shows. French and Spanish language television is buffered from excessive American influence by the fact of language, and likewise supports a host of homegrown productions. The success of French and Spanish language domestic television and movies in Caribbean often exceeds that of its English language counterpart. Caribbean Media Awards honor the best feature broadcast placements, print and photography from Caribbean-based media outlets. Caribbean humor. Caribbean humor is an integral part of the Caribbean identity. There are several traditions in Caribbean humor in English, Spanish and French. While these traditions are distinct and at times very different, there are common themes that relate to Caribbean's shared history and geopolitical situation in North America and the world. Various trends can be noted in Caribbean comedy. One thread is the portrayal of a typical Caribbean family in an ongoing radio or television series. Examples include a mix of drama, humor, politics and religion, and sitcoms. Another major thread tends to be political and cultural satire. Television shows such as Royal Palm Estate monologuists and writers draw their inspiration from Caribbean society and politics. Another trend revels in absurdity and musician comedians. Satire is arguably the primary characteristic of Caribbean humor, evident in each of these threads, and uniting various genres and regional cultural differences. In 1957, Mento artist Lord Flea stated that West Indians have the best sense of humor in the world. Even the most solemn song, like Laskin Fine, which tells of a boiler explosion on a sugar plantation that killed several of the workers. The natural wit and humor shine though. Sport cricket is very popular in the countries and dependencies that formed the British West Indies. The West Indies cricket team competes in test matches, one-day internationals and 2020 internationals. The West Indies major domestic competitions are the regional four-day competition and the regional Super 50 and more recently the Caribbean Premier League. The regional football governing body is the Caribbean Football Union. National teams have competed in the Cfu Championship from 1978 to 1988 and the Caribbean Cup since 1989. The top 4 teams in the tournament qualify for the CONCACAF Gold Cup. Cuba qualified to the FIFA World Cup in 1938, Haiti in 1974, Jamaica in 1998 and Trinidad and Tobago in 2006. The Cfu Club Championship is the regional tournament for football clubs. The winner qualified for the CONCACAF Champions Cup from 1997 until 2008. Since 2008-09, the top 3 clubs qualify for a preliminary round of the CONCACAF Champions League. However, the most popular sport in Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico and the Netherlands Antilles is baseball. The Caribbean Series, held since 1949, features the national champions from the top Caribbean leagues. The Cuban national team has claimed the Baseball World Cup 25 times, whereas the Dominican Republic won the 2013 World Baseball Classic. In the Pan American Games, Cuba has won 12 editions and Dominican Republic once, whereas Puerto Rico earned the silver medal twice. In the Central American and Caribbean Games, Cuba has won 15 gold medals, whereas Dominican Republic has won 3 and Puerto Rico 2. Several Caribbean players have joined the Major League Baseball. In the 2014 there were 82 Dominicans, 19 Cubans and 11 Puerto Ricans. Notable Caribbean players are Juan Marichal, Pedro Martinez, Roberto Clemente, Orlando Cepeda and Roberto Alomar. The Puerto Rico men's national basketball team finished 4th in the 1990 FIBA World Championship and won 3 FIBA FIBA Americas Championships and 2 Pan American Games. Meanwhile, the Cuba women's national basketball team finished third in the 1990 FIBA World Championship for women and won 3 FIBA Americas Championships and 3 Pan American Games. Other popular team sports in the Caribbean include rugby union and softball. Popular individual sports include auto racing, boxing, cycling, golf, hiking, horse racing, skateboarding, swimming, tennis, triathlon, track and field, water sports, and wrestling. Cuba ranks second in Olympic boxing and fifth in judo, whereas Jamaica has been a power in Olympic sprint running. At the Pan American Games, Cuba ranks second in the medal table, Dominican Republic ranks 10th, Puerto Rico 11th and Jamaica 13th. At the Central American and Caribbean Games, Cuba ranks 1st, Puerto Rico 5th, Dominican Republic 6th, Jamaica 7th and Trinidad and Tobago 11th. The 1966 British Empire and Commonwealth Games were held in Kingston, Jamaica. As an area with a generally warm climate, the Caribbean countries have enjoyed greater success at the Summer Olympics than at the Winter Olympics. However, the Jamaica national bobsleigh team has qualified to the Winter Olympic Games since 1988. Other notable Caribbean competitors at the Winter Games are Errol Fraser, Dow Travers, George Tucker and Ann Abernathy. The Caribbean awards sports icons are based on accomplishments made over the last 60 years. For these who have made the mark in the various fields of sports, great achievements in Caribbean sport are recognized by Caribbean Sports Hall of Fame, while trophies are awarded annually to top athlete by a panel of journalists. Outside views.